Welcome to another NCWA Virtual Shop Talk. I'm Bill Pierce. Today we're with club member John Ellis of Sunny Day Dulcimers in Arlington, Washington. Thanks for the great music, John. I would think that not a lot of people know very much about this unique instrument. Can you give us a quick primer on just what a dulcimer is?
Sure, Bill, I'll try and do that. The mountain or Appalachian dulcimer that I have here is one that I built, a replica of the instruments that were built by the Scots-Irish immigrants to the Appalachian Mountains back in the late 1700s. When they first moved to this side of the ocean, they brought with them not this instrument exactly, but the better parts of 4 other instruments that they were knowledgeable about, and combined those elements into this instrument. There's no record of this actual kind of instrument coming from Europe or Ireland or Scotland at all. They say that this is truly an American folk instrument in that only 2 instruments we know of, stringed instruments, have been invented in North America. This one, the Appalachian or mountain dulcimer, as well as the 5-string banjo. So it is truly an American folk instrument that nearly lost its prominence in the middle 1900s. It kind of disappeared for a number of reasons, but it has kind of made a bit of a comeback, especially on the East Coast. A lot of people on the West Coast don't know a lot about the instrument. So my mission in life, if you will, is to make the instrument known to more people, make the music known to more people, thus hopefully keeping its history alive.
So how did you get into building dulcimers?
Well, I was a Seattle firefighter for 36 years, and I retired in 2014, and I wanted to do something to keep me out of trouble. Something I wanted to do had to involve woodworking, which I've done for many, many years, and also wanted it to honor my heritage somehow. And so in looking into my background on Ancestry.com, I found this area of the United States with this instrument and thought I could build one of those. So I got on YouTube, on the internet, and found out as much as I could, spent hundreds of hours researching the instrument, how to build them, found a lot of information, got out in my wood shop and started in. And now here I am, going on 7 years later, and about 64 instruments so far completed in that time. So it's been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, and it keeps me out of trouble.
I'm sure that in building dulcimers, you must not only use some very specific techniques, but also perhaps certain things you have learned along the way that could be of interest to woodworkers in general. Would you talk about some of the specific steps you take in dulcimer building and perhaps highlight anything that might be useful in other applications? Maybe we could start with how you select your wood for your instrument.
Sure, and probably the best way to do that is to go over a quick little introduction on some of the terminology involved, because I'll be using that as we go, and it's best if you have an idea of what I'm talking about a little bit here. The main parts to a dulcimer, and most any stringed instrument, first and foremost is what's called the soundboard, or also in this case, the top, because the dulcimer is played on your lap, strummed like I was doing earlier. So that's the top versus the back, the sides, the peg head. Peg heads can come in a scroll shape, or also what I call a flat guitar shape. And different woods are required in different areas to really create the best sound quality. The tone wood has to be a softer, more flexible wood, because as the strings are plucked, those vibrations are imparted through the fretboard into the top or the soundboard, which has to vibrate to replicate those sound waves, amplify them into the air. We can use harder wood, and usually it's more decorative then. We can get nicer grain patterns and stuff in both the sides and the back. And the peg head can be just basically anything you want it to be, based on figure and color. You don't want too soft a wood because then the tuning machines will not hold as well. So with that in mind, I developed a quick reference chart of the woods that I mostly use in my building here based on the Janka hardness chart, which most of you are probably familiar with. I'm going to reach around here and see if I can read this while I explain it a little bit. But I've listed the woods that I primarily have available to me for my uses, from softest to hardest on this list. Then the hardness increases here. We can see by the color coding here what parts of the dulcimer can use which hardnesses of woods. So the softest woods, from basically 350 for western red cedar to mahogany down here at 900, any of these could be acceptable for a soundboard. Keep going down the list, you get down here to the very, very hard ones. Ebony at 3080 Janka units would only be used probably for the fingerboard or the nut or the bridge that is basically the hardest wood on the instrument. That's kind of how I'd select the woods that I'm going to use. Having said that, what I really prefer to do when I'm dealing with a customer that's buying an instrument, I like to let them choose and pick what they want for their woods. So we do that by having little wood samples here, and I've color-coded them so that they can be, the customer can see the ones with the green tape on them are the ones that they can pick for their soundboard. The ones with the white are ideal for peg heads. Sides and backs are in the blue tape. So they can look through here and decide, well, okay, here's all my yellows. Which one do I like for my preference? And they can see both finished and unfinished samples of the woods. And then we let them decide, and then I go from there with the building of the instrument. It gives them a feeling of inclusiveness, helping to design their instrument. It makes their instrument also a personalized one of a kind, that basically nobody's got one just exactly like it. Once I've helped the client decide what wood they want to use for the various parts of their instrument, I then go to my local suppliers. I try and use local whenever I can. I need to touch and feel and smell and hear the sound of the wood before I use it. For example, this is a piece of eastern maple that would probably become a back for an instrument. And it makes a very distinctive sound. Western red cedar is very popular for the soundboard or the top of the instrument. You're looking for that kind of musical quality as you're listening to the different sounds. This is a piece of Port Orford cedar. There's one I like. Now see, you can hear a little more of a ring to that one. So that's part of the process. Then I try and look at the board that I'm going to use and decide what I can get out of it at what size it is. I try and always use 4/4 at least, or 5/4 thick board, because I book match all of my tops and backs. Most of you know what book matching is, but basically it's taking a board. Here's my 4/4 inch board. Saw it down the length, rip it, if you will, down the length of the board, open it up like a book, and you end up with a mirror image of the grain. And you can basically do that two ways. And it just makes a very nice, aesthetically pleasing presentation to the instrument, done by all the good builders. So I'm trying to emulate the good builders of the world, I guess. Most of my instruments are between 7 to 9 inches in width at the widest part here. So with the book matching process, I basically need to start with a board that's at least 4, maybe 5 inches wide. My theory is start big, cut off more if you need to, rather than start small and have to add some, because that gets, I have on occasion ended up putting like a contrasting color stripe in the middle of the back just to get a little more width out of the boards, because I cut them too narrow or couldn't find a piece wide enough at the lumberyard. So that's doable, but it kind of cuts down on the book matching technique a little bit too. Then I will add anywhere from 2 to 4 inches. So if my first measurement is says 4.5, if I add another 2 inches, I got 6.5. So now I'm into buying probably a 1x8 or a 4/4 by 8 inch board to start with. If I up that to a little bit wider board, I can get 2 more sets of side boards out of the one long board if I want to use them on that instrument, or I can save them and use them on another instrument. So that's pretty much it for selection of the wood. It's really customer preference as well as the parameters about what wood can be used where on the instrument.
You obviously use some type of bending techniques on some of your dulcimer sides. Is it veneer bending, dry heat bending, or steam bending?
I primarily use steam bending. I have done a little dry bending, but most of my bending is just the sides of the instrument. This is the most traditional shape. It's called an hourglass shape for obvious reasons. And this double bend here is the most common bend I have to make, really. So I use this contraption here. I started out originally with a wooden box here, and this little unit that came from Rockler, probably 6 years ago. I bought this for about $60. I think it's about $80 now, but it works very well. It's just a heating element in a water tank, plugs into 110. A steam delivery hose goes into the end of my container for my wood, which is just a 4-inch vent pipe with some insulation wrapped around it. It does have a little 1/4-inch weep hole here so that the steam pressure cannot get overly built up and be a hazard. Certainly one of the problems we can have with steam is it gets hot and it gets very explosive at times if you don't have the safety measures in place to deal with that. The wooden box I started with, it kind of got used enough that it swelled up and contracted, and over time developed leaks that I wasn't happy with. So that's when I went to this last year. It seems to be working out real well. And in steam bending, probably one of the biggest things that I always caution people about if they're going to try it or something, it gets hot, and you want a good pair of gloves, and or even maybe a hot pad or a paper, dish towel or something. So when you're pulling the wood out of the vessel, you could easily get burned. So don't forget your gloves if you want to give it a try.
I wonder if people are reluctant to try steam bending, thinking that the initial outlay might be cost prohibitive. What would it cost to get going?
Well, I mentioned the initial outlay for this unit, probably under $10 for a piece of pipe and the fittings for something like this, or you could certainly build like I did, a wooden box for your first go around with steam bending, out of scraps you've got laying around your shop. I have a good friend that's a cabinet maker that does a fair bit of steam bending in his trade, and he uses a hot plate and a 2.5-gallon metal gas can. I think he bought it new, so it never had gas in it, but that's his vessel for the water to heat to make the steam. He likes it because it has the spring-loaded trigger for the cap, so that's his safety valve that doesn't allow that to overpressure for him. My first heater before I had this Rockler unit was just a pressure cooker, old-fashioned pressure cooker with the lid that locks on and the little whistling vent that is the safety valve. I think I got that for like $5 from Value Village or Salvation Army or something like that. And it worked pretty well for the first few times. Just took a little more setup than this does, so this was kind of a step up from that. But really the outlay is not cost prohibitive if you think you want to give it a try. If someone wanted to give it a try without outlaying anything, I'd be more than happy to loan them my setup here too.
Would you show us the process of steam bending?
Okay, once the wood is in the steamer, well, first let's talk about different kinds of wood. There's an old belief that you cannot bend kiln-dried wood, that you need air-dried wood to actually do steam bending of it. Technically speaking, it has to do with the heat from the steam bending process actually is generating enough heat within the cellular structure of the wood to set the lignin within the cells so that it holds the shape that it's meant to hold when you bend it. Kiln drying was once believed to do that, and it's like concrete. Once it's set, you can't unset it. Same with the lignin in the cell structure of the wood. Once it's brought up to that certain temperature with the kiln drying process, you can't loosen it again and bend it, heat it, and bend it again. In experimenting with different woods, it's really hard to find air-dried wood unless you either have a mill yourself or know somebody that does, where you can cut your own wood, mill it yourself. Lumberyards, a lot of the people that are, quote, helping you at lumberyards don't even know the difference. So it's a challenge to find air-dried wood. So I tried to learn how to do it as best I could with kiln-dried wood, and I've had fairly good success. I have found that I need to heat it longer than is recommended for air-dried wood. I've also found it helpful to soak it in water overnight before I do the bending process. And I've done okay. So it can be done. It just takes a little more examination of your process, I guess you could say. So, having said that, we've got the wood in the steam chamber. The old adage was for air-dried wood, you steamed it for 15 minutes per quarter inch of thickness of the wood. So if you had a full inch thickness of wood, you would steam it for an hour. Most of my sides that I'm bending in this form here are 1/8 of an inch thick. So using that same formula on air-dried wood, I would put those in here for 7.5 minutes. Transposing that over to kiln-dried wood, I put it in for a lot longer than that. I actually soak my wood overnight first, put it in here for usually 20-25 minutes to even a half an hour per 1/8 inch of thickness, and usually 1/8 inch is all I'm at. So we've had our wood in the steamer. We've had the steam go into it for 25 minutes now. With our gloves on, we take it out of the steam chamber, and very quickly, because 1/8 inch wood will cool down real fast. So real quickly move it from the steamer, put it into the form, get the form put back together. Since that one's not really flexible, I'll use the one that's pre-bent here. Get the form in there, get everything lined up where it needs to be, throw the clamps on it. And if your jig is big enough and stout enough like this one is, 2 clamps is all it takes. Squeeze it down here in the apex that's toward us, and the apex that is away from us just naturally ends up in the right place. I do both pieces at once, so they have the exact same curve. The only thing that you have to watch for is that because of the radius on the inner surface of the wood versus the outer surface of the wood, you'll end up with just a hair different reference point for the ends. So I end up then recutting the ends of the 2 boards to match exactly so the curves match too. Not a big thing. You only have to do it wrong once or twice and you learn.
What about dry bending techniques?
I have done a little dry bending, Bill, not a lot. It's kind of a fun thing to try. It can be easily ruined in a heartbeat, but the results can be really nice. I'm not going to actually do it here for you on film, but I will show you my little process that I set up here. Started out with basically just a post saddle that you would mount a 4x4 post into a piece of concrete in the ground with, and that can be put into the vise then. A propane tank propped up in such a way that the gas is directed into the pipe. Light it, the pipe gets hot. Take your piece of wood that you want to bend. In this case, I have a little piece of about 1/8 inch cherry. This is air dried, so it probably would bend up pretty good. I use water to wet it where it's going to touch the pipe. With the heat going and the pipe hot, I then just start moving it back and forth across here, keeping it moving. If you don't keep it moving, you're going to burn it. Wet it down some more, keep doing it, wet it down some more, keep doing it. And it'll bend right around this pipe as you go. Then put it in your form to hold it. I didn't mention on the earlier when we were showing the steam bending, people might want to know how long it needs to stay in the jig after it's clamped down. Overnight, at least, even 24 hours. You want to make sure that wood completely cools off, and there's not a lot of circulation within the form itself because it's wood against wood against wood. So I leave it in there at least overnight. Usually I bend it between 8 o'clock and noon one morning, take it out the next morning. That works pretty good. Same with this. If you get this bent where you want it, put it in the clamp, leave it overnight, and you've got a piece of bent wood.
Thanks for watching us today at Sunny Day Dulcimers. Be sure to join us for part 2 of this virtual shop talk, where John will tell us about construction methods in glue-up, choices of instrument shape and their history, and building fretboards to create musically accurate pitches on the strings.